Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, I also wanted to have a quick discussion about other events that have occurred in the world, and unfortunately, the area in the world that you can now see on my map, if I speak about what is happening, I am at great risk of being demonetized and or censored by the purple hair powers that be in San Francisco. Just a fact. The video before last that I posted, I've gotten quite a bit of feedback about comments being deleted. That piece of content about what is happening in this part of the world was demonetized and heavily censored, as were many of the comments that were also made. So, unfortunately, YouTube is a censor machine. It does not want the average world citizen, the average rational, reasonable world citizen, to understand what is happening in the world. It wants the world to be according to what it articulates out of San Francisco. And that's what YouTube wants you to not only see, but to believe. They are the new thought police. Now, going back to the war between the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, its Ukrainian proxy forces, and the Russian Federation. I've talked repeatedly about the ongoing collapse of the Donbass area of operations, and it is continuing to happen. As we speak, the Kurakova pocket continues to collapse. There are multiple Ukrainian units that have now been enveloped by Russian forces. Again, the mapping service that I use is a Ukrainian-supported mapping service. Albeit they are a little bit slow in terms of where things are happening and how quickly Russian forces take control of certain areas. But nonetheless, it gives me the opportunity to use this mapping service that at least does update, and it does sort of show you what is happening on the ground eventually. Now, the Kurakova pocket, Hanavika. You can see this area here. Now let's go back and let's look at what has happened in this area. Again, if you are the battalion battle group of Ukrainian forces that have been isolated here, you are not having a good time right now. And it's happening everywhere along the Donbass front. Envelopment operation. To the southwest of Pokrovsk. Envelopment operation. Right here. The Russians are now on the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Again, they are attacking to the south by southwest of Pokrovsk and to the south by southeast as well. And again, it is all but certain that eventually Pokrovsk will be encircled, enveloped, and then captured by Russian forces. Now, elsewhere, a part of the combat zone that has not been talked about very much, that has been relatively quiet in terms of major Russian offensive operations, we may be seeing preparatory work by the Russians down here in Kherson. Now, at one point, I did not believe that Russian forces would attempt another crossing of the Dnipro River. I thought that highly improbable. The only way that the Russians would be able to conduct a forced crossing of the Dnipro River was if we were starting to see a general collapse of the Ukrainian military. Now, what has also been happening in Kherson is a tremendous amount of Russian drone activity. The Russians have been able to interdict large amounts of Ukrainian combat equipment, reinforcements, and supplies coming into Kherson with drones, especially the longer range, in some cases now fully autonomous, attack drone known as the Lancet 3. Probably in iteration 4 now as well. But these Russian drone units have caused havoc in the Ukrainian ability to reinforce and move troops and supplies in and out of Kherson. At the same time, there are reports that the Russians are massing forces, specifically amphibious capable forces, within the vicinity of Kherson, possibly in preparation for a large-scale river crossing of the Dnipro River. Now, why would they do that? Does that seem like a prudent operation given the capability in terms of real-time intelligence data that the Ukrainians are able to get from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the United States? I would say that would be the case. Very high risk, possibly high reward operation. Unless the Russian Federation is aware that the Ukrainian military is getting closer to collapse. I believe that the Russians would attempt a river crossing of the Dnipro, seizing control of Kherson, in the case of a general collapse of the Ukrainian military. If these Ukrainian forces in Kherson are continuing to suffer day in and day out attacks by Russian long-range artillery, and more importantly, attack drones, where is their morale? And then again, as we watch the collapse of the Donbass area of operations, if we see the collapse of the Kharkova pocket, if we see Russian forces continuing to move towards Kupiansk, isolating Ukrainian forces in these areas, are we going to witness the general collapse of the Ukrainian military? Given the nature and the intensity of the warfare that is happening, it's highly likely. Highly likely. And given the information that is coming out of the Ukrainian military right now, specifically regarding the inability of the Ukrainian military to staff its units, to recruit, train, and then redeploy those newly conscripted forces to the front lines, is becoming much, much tougher. The war that is happening right now and the morale that exists in the Ukrainian military right now, as compared to at the onset of the conflict, is black and white. They're polar opposites. At one point, the Ukrainian military was getting thousands of volunteers at the onset of the conflict. Morale was high. There was no doubt that there was high esprit de corps in many units of the Ukrainian military. It was proficient. It was capable. And again, it had fairly high morale. Fast forward to where we're at right now, not the case. One would argue that, well, I don't even think one needs to argue that the morale of the Ukrainian military is at the lowest it has ever been. Not only that, the will of the population of the Ukraine to continue war is dropping rapidly. Dropping rapidly. I think for the most part, most rational Ukrainians are fully aware that the probability of a victory, of reclaiming many of these territories that Volodymyr Zelensky has proclaimed that he wishes to retake, is not going to happen. And right now it is simply a defensive war to try and prevent losing more territory. But the problem is they're losing more territory day in and day out. And the average Ukrainian knows that. And then the question is, do they continue to send their sons and daughters, mostly sons, to the front, only to be killed, to then have that territory that they were defending be taken by Russian forces? Again, the Russians are not going to stop until victory. They're just not. This war is more important for the Russians, vastly more important than it is for the United States and its Western European allies. And again, eventually, those supplies, and more importantly, those monies that are flowing into Volodymyr Zelensky's coffer, is eventually going to cut off. About 30 days. It's done. It's not going to happen anymore. So again, are the Russians, we have seen preparatory work south of Orkiv, we've seen preparatory work near Kherson. Now, some believe that if there is a rapid collapse of the Ukrainian military, that it will not just be Kherson. In all probability, we will see the Russians move rapidly into Mykolaiv, and then ultimately the grand prize for the Russians is Odessa. Odessa arguably is probably more important than any other city in the Ukraine at this point. And a key battlefield goal, a key war objective at the start of this conflict was Odessa. Odessa, Kherson, Kharkov. But that is where we are at for today. We will continue to cover. Thank you for joining us. As always, have a good day.